I think we need to draw a distinction between the near term and the long term. So, the deficit today is large, mainly because we still have very high unemployment. And there's certainly no sign that the deficit that we're running now is a threat to the U.S. economy. We're still borrowing at very low rates. When times get tough, where do people want to invest? They want to invest in U.S. government bonds. So the deficit and the debt are not an immediate problem, but they absolutely are a long-run problem. If you look at the long-run budget projections coming out of the Congressional Budget Office, those are truly terrifying. I mean, 20 or 30 years from now, we're looking at deficits of 16 or more percent of GDP every year. And that's just completely and utterly unsustainable. No country has ever run deficits like that and actually managed to stay solvent. So the way I describe it is the deficit is not an immediate threat, but a terrible long-run threat to the prosperity and solvency of the United States. The truth is we have two terrible problems. We have very high unemployment. More than 14 million Americans are unemployed, and we have a terrible long-run budget problem. And the answer is we just simply have to make progress on both of those things. And that's why I feel so strongly that the right policy is to pair an aggressive jobs program today, which requires more government spending, requires tax cuts, but pair that with a much more serious reduction in our long-run deficit. That absolutely is the right economic policy for the United States. The other thing to say is there's a synergy between dealing with both these problems. Nothing would be worse for our long-run budgetary health than if our unemployment rate stayed permanently higher. And, the number one way we can make sure that that doesn't happen is to get people back to work so we don't have the deterioration of skills and people losing their attachment to the labor force. So I think dealing with our unemployment problem today can make dealing with our long-run budget problem less difficult. But it may also work the other direction. There's a lot of talk these days about how uncertainty may be holding back the recovery, and I don't think that's really a very big factor. But certainly to the degree that people are uncertain, I would think a worry about our long-run budget is the closest thing to a real concern. And so if we took measures to definitively deal with that, to pass the plan right now, to get a big deficit reduction over time, I think that could potentially have some confidence effect today and make people more willing to hire and more willing to get this recovery going. Well, I think here the right phrase is failure is not an option. I mean, we really do have to deal with our long-run deficit, and we have put a lot of weight on the shoulders of this super committee, and they simply have to step up, and Congress and the President are going to have to get behind what they come up with. So, certainly I think failure would be incredibly detrimental to the United States, and more fundamentally, we have a very large long-term deficit problem. We just simply have to fix it. Oh, absolutely. Going big is something that would surely reassure financial markets. Again, importantly, I think financial markets today are not showing any signs of worry about the United States. So the United States is still able to borrow at historically low rates. I think people understand why our deficit is large today. But certainly everyone knows what those projections are looking out 20, 30 years, and that the United States is on an unsustainable trajectory. So taking action today, not necessarily to get the deficit down right now, as I've described, we probably need to be doing more on the fiscal side to actually be supporting the recovery, but taking making the hard decisions now, passing the plan now that will get the deficit down definitively over time as we gradually recover. Of course that's going to reassure markets. I know it would reassure me. I'm sure it would reassure every American that we'd put our country on a sustainable fiscal path. I think this is one of those issues where the American people, if anything, have been ahead of policymakers. I think they've been concerned about the long-run deficit. I think they've shown that they're willing to listen to common sense solutions. You know, I'll mention, for example, the tax issue. If you poll American people, they certainly say we should at least be raising taxes on the wealthiest Americans, and that's something that I think the average voter is showing a lot more common sense right now than the United States Congress. So I do think the American people would be behind a sensible plan. I think they need to be educated. I think they need to be a part of the discussion. I think they need to know just how severe the problems are and why the super committee and the Congress and the president are going to have to come up with some frankly painful solutions. But I think when they know the facts, they will have they will be behind it, because the average American is very sensible, and we're going to have sensible plans to deal with this very big problem. So I think the long-run deficit problem in the United States, this has been well documented by the Congressional Budget Office, by every committee that has looked at this, right? It's a very big problem, and so it's going to take a lot of measures to actually get it under control. And I think that's a really important idea. You know, we tend to break things down, and people want to say, well, if we just cut discretionary spending, well, there's no way you're going to be able to deal with the tremendous long-run budget problem if you just focus on that one very small part of the budget. Inevitably, any solution is going to involve cutting discretionary spending, slowing the growth rate of entitlement spending, and raising tax revenues. And I think the sooner we realize that you're going to have to be firing on all cylinders and taking this kind of a balanced approach, I think the more likely it is that we're actually going to get to a sensible solution. Well, I think if you look at any of the projections and the careful studies, you know, where are the big long-run budget deficits coming from? It's largely the growth of government health expenditures, so expenditures through Medicare and Medicaid. So I think realistically, to just deal with the problem that we're facing, we're going to need to be slowing the growth of spending in those areas. Now, Social Security, I think, is a somewhat of a different issue. So Social Security, the Social Security system is certainly under pressure because of the retirement of the baby boom, and we certainly are having that demographic bulge. But I think that is certainly a more manageable problem, and something that we want to tackle mainly to make sure that this program stays solvent and is there for future generations. But it's certainly not nearly as big a part of the problem as rising government health expenditures. So the Bipartisan Fiscal Commission did propose a very aggressive plan that did trim the deficit some $4 trillion over the next 10 years. I think that is about the size that absolutely needs to happen. We made some real progress on our deficit problem in August, but it wasn't enough. And so we absolutely do need to go big, because the problems that we're facing on our deficit are big, and the solutions are going to have to be more substantial than they've been before if we're really going to get this problem under control. Right. So the first reason to support a major deficit reduction plan is just simply we have a major long-run deficit problem, and we absolutely need to deal with it for the long-run health of the American economy and the long-run solvency of the American government. But I think there is also, I think, a special message to progressive Democrats. You know, no one cares more about getting the unemployment rate down and doing what we need to do now to get the recovery really going in a good, strong way. But I think the only way that you can do that, both politically and in a responsible manner, is to pair what the president has proposed on a jobs package with a big long-run deficit plan, that is how you reassure markets, that's how you reassure every American that we're going to deal with our long-run deficit problems, and it's how you create the space to do what you need to do for unemployment today. And so that is absolutely the right economic policy, and it's the one that will allow us to deal with the two big problems that we face, jobs and a long-run budget deficit. Well, certainly, I think anyone that watched what happened this summer has to be a little bit nervous about whether our political system is up to dealing with this. We certainly did not clothe ourselves in glory in the debate over the debt ceiling this summer. But I refuse to become pessimistic. You know, throughout our history, we have had to face some very tough issues. And, you know, policymakers have found a way to step up, to put the good of the country ahead of their own political interests. And I firmly believe that they're going to do that again this time, because the stakes are just so large, our problems are so desperately in need of solutions, that I certainly very much hope and expect policymakers to rise to the occasion, and I certainly hope they don't disappoint me.